What's going on, everybody? I am the spitting statistician, Dane Martinez, and this is the Action Network's Expert's Guide to Live Betting. As we've been talking about, the live betting is certainly growing, and we're about to get to the football season, so everybody probably wants to know how to bet live. And today, I have that conversation with our guy, Collin Wilson. Collin, how you doing today, man?
I'm doing great. I'm actually live betting as we're doing this segment, so I'm a perfect guest to have on this show.
Absolutely. Do as I say and as I do, says Collin. So let me ask you kind of at the top level here. Live betting is new for some people, right? Like, how have you gotten into live betting? Why do you like doing it so much in the NFL?
Well, I mean, I love doing it in both NFL and college football,
Sure.
and the reason is because there are a lot of things that can happen during the game that are essentially flukes. Like they're not going to happen again. There wasn't a high percentage of it happening anyways, but it does. And the instances of that is like a defensive lineman finds a football, picks it up, and he's scoop and score, right?
Mhm.
There could be a pick six. There could be a special teams. And anytime that there's a fluke play that happens in the game that had a low probability, it was just a simple mistake. And the other team and the number from the live market perspective moves like a full possession or a full
Right.
touchdown. That's giving you a window to get in there and get in on a team, especially if it's a team that you wanted to bet pregame, but you didn't like the number. Maybe you have to pay attention to your key numbers. Maybe it was 7.5, maybe it was 6.5. And now it's finally crossed the barrier that you want. So turnovers are the biggest thing that moves because the algorithms that make all of these live bets, they just know there's a score. Now they may
Mhm.
degrade a special teams or a pick six or something like that, but still that line is going to move based on something that didn't have a high probability in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. And you bring up the word algorithm. And I think that's so important when understanding how to bet live because you said it, right? It's about the original cap of the game and then time score down and distance. And that's about it. And some of the plays you're describing, like a pick six or a special teams touchdown, right? Those are what I would just call like jolts to the system that don't necessarily have fidelity to the way the game was originally analyzed or handicapped, right? So it's a special team score is kind of like an extra score that it wasn't counting on. And now the algorithm is putting that in play where you actually think maybe going under that is a good play. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, the under is a great example. So if you have, there have been times in college football where there'll be just three straight scores in the first quarter. If any of you out there that love Pac-12 after dark, some crazy numbers can get up pretty fast.
Right.
That doesn't mean the tempo of the game is necessarily that fast. That just means that there was a busted play, explosive plays. That happens all the time. And so what the algorithm sees on that is that, hey, there's a score. Now, it doesn't take into account if the drive took 1 second or
Yep.
if the drive took 8 minutes. Think about like an Army game going on versus say, something high tempo, like a
Sure.
Mark Whipple was running at Pitt last year with Kenny Pickett. Right. So I think you really have to know that the length of the drive and if that's the established tempo for the game, because if it's a fluke one-off,
Right.
you can take an under if the tempo is expected to be low.
Yeah, it's those flukes, it's those kind of anomalies, right? Whether it is the pick six, the special teams touchdown, a punt return is not something that can be kind of there's no pace for that, shall we say. Another thing that you mentioned that I think is really interesting is the key numbers. Collin, and what I find interesting, right? I'll hear all week leading up to a game. Oh, I'm worried about that hook. I'm worried about that hook at 7.5 or 6.5, right? And people agonize over this. And then all of a sudden, you can literally be two drives into the game and poof, that hook is gone. And all of a sudden, you were worried about it at 7.5, and now it's staring at you at 6, literally one drive into the game. Talk to me about how live really kind of blurs the line on, kind of the original capping, especially around the key numbers.
Yeah, I really think people should know what there's a difference between college football and NFL totals. Now, the NFL total over most recent years, like 5 to 7 years, has the average points per game has really gone up. It used to be where the key range was 44 to 48, and that just doesn't exist anymore. It's more like 51, 52. There's a lot of scoring in the NFL. And you say, why? They're adopting the college football model more and more with some of these offensive plays, and that's going to lead to more scoring. So there's a different set of value on totals in NFL versus college football. Like, for example, in college football, the score of 55 is around 2.6% of the time, as to where if you were to go up to like 58 or, somewhere like 57, that's almost cut in half. So you have to know what your key numbers are in those various sports, because really the probability of hitting them, I can't tell you how many times I've seen a game land on 55. And of course, 49, divisible by 7. All those numbers are really important, and knowing their percentages is how you live bet, a total up or down around those boundaries. You're trying to set a 10-point window.
Hey, can I follow up on that? Because I want to ask people about key numbers all the time, because now, especially in the last few years, Collin, there's been a preponderance in the NFL and in college of kickers missing extra points, teams going for two. The kind of back of the card says, I now even go for it on 4th and 7 on my opponent's 38, right? So has those kind of morphed a little bit? Or when you see a game where there is a missed extra point, do those kind of key numbers still hold throughout?
Amazingly, the number of 3s and 7s, which are easily the most popular ones, that hasn't fallen off whatsoever.
Okay.
But there are, because everybody is trying to get to a divisible by 7. There's more emphasis on 8 and there's more emphasis on 11. Those are two big numbers that have come up in the NFL now, because everybody's trying to get to the key of 8 or 11. Or maybe it's one of those coaches that's not Mike Tomlin and will not go for 2, and then it's being divisible by 7 all the time. But it's had a change on a lot of the other numbers. It's had an increase on 8 and 11, but there really hasn't been a dip on 3 and 7.
All right. One thing I always like to do, and I'd like to kind of pressure test this against your expertise. We're talking a lot about sides and totals, but in football, at least in the NFL, there is also a ton, Collin, of live prop betting. And I think that game flow, game script is very, very important. You could take a step back at halftime, see a team with a 2-touchdown lead, and they will be offering not the passing yards, but the passing attempts for the quarterback that is down. And, I talk about fidelity to the game plan a lot. Well, that goes out the window when you're down by 17 in the third quarter. And I don't know that the book has completely adjusted for some of those game script kind of props around, say, the rushing offense of the team that's up or the kind of passing offense of the team that's down. Have you found that as well, or am I crazy?
No, you're absolutely right. And it's the difference between what's called standard downs and what's passing downs. And if you don't know what that is, it's just trying to be on schedule. If you're 3rd and 4, then you're in a standard down. If you're in 3rd and 5, you're in a passing down. It's that easy. And so if you're not, getting those required yards, you're essentially going to be in what should be an all-time passing downs. So the question is, know your team, if they're a strong standard downs team, if they can move the pile, move the chains on the ground, or with maybe a 2 tight end set and dump offs, versus what they are in passing downs. And that's where you find your most explosive plays, your best wide receivers. And if a team is excellent in passing downs, then you're probably going to want to tend to take that passing attempts over, because they're probably, they're going to stay in that all day, or at least number of yards from an explosive play point of view. So I think it's more knowing your team and what your coach's tendency is about how he feels about staying on schedule. Because even in college football, we're seeing a huge trend of coaches who want to go for it on 4th down.
Right.
And what does that mean? Well, you've taken 3rd down away as a passing down. It's now a handoff drawdown to get 4th and 3, 4th and 2. So know what your team's tendencies are when you're playing those props, because if you have a coach that's dead set on going on 4th and down, then he's going to run a lot on 3rd down. If you have a coach who likes to air it out, that's the kind of one you want to back on a prop like that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And this is just another example of live betting. You see what is happening, and that can give you clues as to what will happen for the rest of the game. That's why we call it here the expert's guide to live betting. I'm the spitting statistician, Dane Martinez. I got Collin Wilson with me here as well on the Action Network. One other piece of info that I think you mentioned that's really important to know in college football is even the coaches themselves, and sometimes the relationship between the coaches. In college football, sometimes teams need style points, Collin, and sometimes they don't. Sometimes teams will run it up and sometimes they won't. And if you have a kind of feel of that, that could be really important when you see a live 17.5-point spread, right?
Yeah, and I think this goes back to what I call the Mike Bobo rule. And if you don't know who that is, former offensive coordinator of Georgia, former head coach of Colorado State, he refused to take a knee. He had teams beaten by 50 and was still going tempo and still trying to score touchdowns. And if you know what the tendency of the coach is, then you can kind of guess live betting wise if it's going to go over or if it's going to go under. So the example of going over all the time just because he can is Mike Bobo. Now you think about other coaches and maybe they don't want to do that. Look at what Alabama did against Notre Dame in the college football playoff a couple of years ago. Nick Saban is now getting famous for getting 3-score leads and sitting on the ball in the second half. They'll blitz you for 28 to 35 points in the second quarter, and then they'll only score once in the second half because they have such a comfortable lead. Don't want to get your players hurt. You want to go conservative football. And I think that brings up a really important point. Know if these coaches actually like each other.
So
right?
if Texas A&M this year, do you think it'll still happen?
Right. And I think, Jimbo Fisher is a perfect example of that, because he was going with an up-tempo offense at Clemson to cover a spread with 20 seconds left in the game, and Dabo was trying to keep him out of the end zone. So I think you have to know who your coaches are and what their tendencies. And so when Saban plays Jimbo, if either of them has a chance to run it up, play out,
the 21 and a half.
they're going to do it. But if you want another example, I went to SEC Media Days, and all Nick Saban could talk about was how special Coach Sark was, how much he loved having him on staff. He's very important, and he's like a family member. I go to Big 12 Media Days, and Sark is telling me about Saban and Miss Terry and how they keep in contact all the time. And it's just like a love fest between these two coaches. Well, guess what? They play each other in week 2. So I am like dead set on the fact that Saban will not blow Sark and Texas out. Get a comfortable lead and sit on the ball? Yes. Blow them out? I don't see it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then I think about, the coach relationship is one thing, but the style points, teams like BYU, Cincinnati, Central Florida, the Chanticleers, they have had to run up the score just to be impressive enough to make it seem like they're on the same level as some of the big boys. What about things like injuries, weather? Do those factor in when you're watching a game live? You see a guy go down, maybe you could get it before they lock it on the site?
Well, I can say that anytime there's snow, both my podcast partner and I, Stuckey, we're just kind of, doing our hands like this because the total drops dramatically, and we call it a snow over because, the public takes that weather and they drive it down. They think it's going to affect passing. They think it's going to affect the kickers. They think it's going to affect, everything. When the truth is it's wind. It has really nothing to do with the snow whatsoever. Right. The snow makes the defense miss tackles. It doesn't mean, you can't, when the running back decides to make his pivot, defenders can't react to it because of field conditions, and it always leads to an over. So really the wind is what you need to look for. Now, as I say that, I saw Georgia Southern nail a 55-yard field goal in 30-mile-an-hour wind. So the wind is actually way more important when it comes to passing. And also one thing that Stuckey and I always harp on in the college football podcast on BBOC is that you need to know your stadium orientation. Some stadiums, the wind just whips end zone to end zone. Some stadiums it swirls. Some stadiums it goes sideline to sideline. And you want to take, where the Dolphins and the Hurricanes play down in Hard Rock Stadium, that has a roof on it with just a square. And people think, oh, it's Miami. It's a coastal city. It's next to the water. There's going to be wind swirling everywhere. But if you look at the dynamic configuration of the top of Hard Rock Stadium, that wind doesn't get in there and it doesn't swirl on the field whatsoever. So, there's never wind there when you would think there would be because of where it's located.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I always say in the snow games, like the offense at least knows where they're going. The defense has to adjust and react, and that could be a problem. I'm with you. Wind is definitely a bigger factor. I think there have been some Cleveland Brown games at home in the last few years where the wind actually was at play. And then there was a Monday night game last year, Buffalo and New England. It became very obvious very quickly. You could hammer some of those passing attempts, like I was saying before. Collin, the last question I want to ask you here on the Expert's Guide to Live Betting is, what about using live to get out of a bad bet? You know what I mean? If before the game, you really like one team or you really like a total one way or the other, and you see that it's not going your way, are you someone who does leverage the live betting markets to kind of make it a wash for you?
Absolutely. I mean, it's the same thing as the stock market. If you bought in at a bad price and you happen to get one day of great activity and it gets a little bit of a pump and you want to get out. Maybe you paid bad juice. Maybe the number moved on you. Absolutely. If you have a chance. And I think that goes back to your handicapping skill set. Not to say that you're a bad handicapper, but at the same time, you need to have a power rating system that you can trust to say the number should be this, the market's going to go to this, and maybe you got the last number and maybe you didn't get what it should be. So I think it all starts when you want to get out of a bad number. It's because you maybe had a bad power rating or didn't pay attention to where it opened and what the key number was in the first place. So I understand live betting just to get some action down on a game because you want it. But generally, that steam at the end of the games, that can come back and bite you. So just know where the proper number should be. And then if you take a bad number against that, try to get that number live. And if you can, just buy out. It doesn't even matter if your window is 3 points, 3.5 would be great if you can get out of a bad one. And watch your juice, because a lot of these live betting books, you're not going to get -110 and you're not going to get -115. They're going to offer -120 and above. So really be careful and pay attention to your juice.
Yeah, absolutely. These are some of the things you need to consider when betting football live, whether it's the NFL or college football. But there is definitely opportunities out there this fall, even once they kick the ball off into the air. For my guy, Collin Wilson, I'm the spitting statistician, Dane Martinez. Make sure to subscribe to us here on the YouTube channel for the Action Network. Make sure to download the Action Network app, unless, of course, you're allergic to money. We'll be talking about more live betting strategies next time. See you then.